Charles, it's amazing. As a former New Yorker, you've gone full hut. Welcome to the show from your international hut life location. How are you tonight, Charles?
I'm great. All hut, no cattle. But yeah, for the free subscribers, I'll take a minute. I probably should say, this place is a hellhole. They're raging rhinoceroses chasing people down, and Cape buffaloes, and fearsome snakes, and poisonous frogs, and this. But the reality is, Indonesia is such a big country. It's approximately, I want to say, it's over 300 million people. If I'm maybe just close to 300 million people, but and the big population centers are the cities. So it's a little bit like Russia in the sense that it's this vast expanse, but when you get out into the hinterland, it's not that really developed on the one hand. On the other hand, compared to the Caribbean, and I've now been all over, not everywhere in Indonesia, but many places. One wonderful thing about the people is they genuinely are warm and grateful to have visitors, particularly visitors from far away. So you get well treated. It's not, I mean, if you want to blow tons of money, you can, but there are many decent price point, very high quality hotels, restaurants, etc. And today, after this broadcast, I've hired a boat, and I'm going to just take the boat from the front of my hotel to the next hotel, which is a pretty nice life. And it's the cost of the boat is $20
Wow. It's
for
amazing.
your own personal boat. I mean, a nice speedboat.
Wow. Yeah, you should be like Crockett and Tubbs out there.
Exactly. But no, I can't. I really can't speak highly enough. I'm sure people will have bad experiences in the big cities. That's a little bit more dangerous. But out here, the views are spectacular. The water's nice. Food's great. The only rough thing at this hotel is there are too many cats, and I'm not allergic to them, but I've got a little sniffle.
Yeah, I'm not big on cats. They definitely make me sneeze, and they always strike me as they're looking at you like if I was big enough, I would kill you. And then we have examples of that in nature with lions and things like that. So watch out for the cats. Charles, a lot of crazy developments in Russia. It seems like now even Trump is on the crazy destroy Russia and help Ukraine train. But before we get to that, we got to explain to everybody what we're talking about with the Socialist network. People might be confused by this scary looking thumbnail.
Yeah, so the idea originally, if you go back into history, actually, and I'll be quick here, but prior to the 1700, inside England, and I can't speak for the rest of you, inside England, if you wanted to get a book published, you had to get, not from the king himself, but you had to get the king's permission to have a book published. So one way of keeping the population down on the farm was to keep them uneducated and then restrict education, that which is published and that which is acceptable thought, just that which supported the monarchy. That was the basic idea. And so within the colonies, the first colony, of course, formal settlement was 1607 in Virginia, there were pros and cons about whether there should be universities inside the United States. And indeed, an ancestor of mine in Virginia gets credit for promoting the University of Virginia, not the University of Virginia, William and Mary, which was the second oldest university or college in the United States. In reality, when you look into his private papers, which are available, he was very much against educating people. And similarly, at Harvard in 1636, they claim that they started in 1636. Of course, that's not true. When you look into the records, it wasn't until 1650 or thereabouts. And again, the people who were setting up Harvard, the view then, and why they wanted to do it, is they wanted to train ministers. It was not about, professional schools. It was not about giving people tools to make themselves wealthy. It was because ministers needed to be educated in the views then of the people running the various colonies in the United States. Harvard then, of course, flourished over time. But it was always a very modest place until the Industrial Revolution. And now what it's become, it's not an educational institution that deserves a subsidy, in my view, or in the view of people, or the educated views of people like Scott Bessent and Trump and others, J.D. Vance. they've gotten to the bottom of something that you and I have been talking about for years now. I have great affection for Harvard, but I always regarded the business school as a trade school. And while I was there, I always wondered how it could be tax exempt. Indeed, one of the things that was really kind of cheesed me off, as the English say, is that before I was graduated, but after, in the period where I passed my exams and I was waiting to get my degree, I started getting solicitations from Harvard saying the average salary of students entering Harvard Business School was X, and we believe the average starting salary of this newly minted class is 2X. You should be quite happy to give Harvard a substantial contribution for the difference in your income. And at the time I thought, well, wait a minute, this has nothing to do with education. This is a fundraising gimmick for an institution that has a big endowment. And indeed, when I was at Yale, my parents had been involved in a modest way with doing various things for the college because they met there and they loved it. And so a top development guy, they started a business school called the Yale School of Organization and Management just about the time that I was going to Harvard. And the guy took me aside and said, would you consider not going to Harvard and going to Yale for this thing? And Yale didn't want to have a business school, I think, for the reasons that I've just explained. And so you look at Harvard and you have to ask yourself, what is it? We've talked about it before, that for GE and for all these publicly traded companies, you have to provide a list in your annual filings of what the hell you are. You have to describe the entity, all the legal entities that are associated with General Electric or pick a public company. Similarly with Harvard, what is included in Harvard? How many professors have set up, the Jason Goodman 3D Institute, Harvard 3D Institute? People do that, at Harvard. Obviously they do it, but we know from Ira Magaziner, he got Harvard to create something or work with the Harvard AIDS Institute. When I called Harvard General Counsel's office and I said, listen, what is this Harvard AIDS Institute? And I called the medical school. And they said, well,
they
I'm
have
not really
Charles.
sure what you're talking about. Huh?
Wyss, Hans-Jörg Wyss has the 3D organ engineering at Harvard.
Does he really?
Yeah.
Wow.
3D printing.
Okay, but that's the Wyss
organs.
Institute.
Yeah.
Well, that's the Wyss Institute. And then you have Jeffrey Epstein getting an office at Harvard or MIT or Harvard or wherever he got an office. So there isn't enough control.
They're 3D printing breast implants at the Wyss Institute. Look at that.
What could go wrong with that? But
get the glasses out.
And you know how me and Gore. But the thing of it is, Harvard and indeed, when I was at Yale, there were a fair number, and at Horace Mann the same thing was true. There were a fair number of people who taught at these various places who didn't have to have a salary. They were truly there not to chase tail, male and female tail, but they were there because they really felt that there was a joy in connecting with young minds who had futures ahead of them, and in promoting or accelerating and enhancing their love of learning, showing them new endeavors. People do. My parents got a joy out of that, and I'm living proof of that. So there were people in that generation who did not go to these campi to become, very wealthy, as other people I know well have done, close to my family. They did it not because they didn't turn it down, but that wasn't their mission in life. Now Harvard has become, and Yale and these elite universities have become places where fraudsters migrate, where self-promoters operate. The trustees, I think the governing body of Harvard is not the Board of Overseers. It's a body called the trustees. It's opaque. Nobody truly understands how decisions get made. But when you go down the list of those trustees, many of them are connected to money-making operations, investment funds, hedge funds, private equity funds, or other types of businesses. And when you go and you say, look, the trustees of Harvard are a select group, we're not exactly sure how they get selected, but I'm one of them, I'm chairman of this, I'm chairman of that. Instantly, people around the world say, okay, I need to do favors to this person because, if I'm on the right side of this trustee, when the time comes to get little Johnny or little Jilly into Harvard, I'll just cozy up to the trustee and say, listen, you've known my Johnny and Jilly since they were 2 and 3, and they can put they know their colors, and now they've gotten 1,500 on their SATs or however you grade it now, and they have decent this, and they've been in an NGO. Give them a shot. None of this gets policed. The media until now has not policed it because the media is complicit. They want to get Johnny and Jilly into Harvard. They want whatever they can get out of Harvard. And Harvard has emerged and places like Harvard, they actually believe, the fact that they're now fighting Trump speaks volumes to me. If I were a trustee, or the equivalent at Harvard, and I found out that, my fellow trustees were going to let Claudine Gay, a known serial plagiarist, remain on board, having been exposed as a serial plagiarist, and pay her $900,000, I would say to my fellow trustees, listen, you have a simple choice to make, okay? You reverse course, or I will resign from the board and devote the rest of my life to putting your asses in jail and suing you into oblivion. Because you're putting your personal interests ahead of the interests of this university. You are case studies in charity, fraud, and mismanagement. And I remember actually on that subject, sorry to go crazy here, but I've been thinking about this. In 1987, in 86, and 5, when Boesky and the various people were involved in insider trading, I would get barraged with memoranda and letters and this and that about Harvard's new Institute of Ethics, how Harvard and academia needs to discipline Wall Street, how the insider trading scandal is, case study, and how you can't trust Wall Street to regulate itself. Harvard in 2024 and 5 has become a case study in how not to run a charity. And I hope that Trump and his people push very hard and not only go after Harvard, go after every major institution that has lost its way. And let's get some Supreme Court precedents if we need them. I think you just need to go to the tax court. But let's go get some Supreme Court precedents, and let's go after the trustees of these places. Let's go after the trustees who derived more than an insubstantial private benefit from their association with Harvard and these other institutions. Because it's clear that the educational system in America is broken down. It is a joke compared to what it was when I went. And I'm not just saying that because I'm ancient. The studies show that around 1979, I think it was 79 or 77, America's educational apparatus was ranked number 1 in the world. And then Carter, that idiot, nitwit, put together the Department of Education, and now we're like 40 in the world. Think of that. Who could be the other 39 countries who are better than we are? Is it Bullshitistan or some other country like that? It's reprehensible that these Harvard trustees and professors and this idiot Garber, the president, would be sending me emails. I got an email from that moron about 2 days ago saying, it's ridiculous what Trump is doing, and please double down and give us more money. My 45th reunion for business school is next week, I think, or coming up in 10 days or so. And I'm getting fundraising letters off of what Trump is doing to try to police this crime spree that is Harvard. So,
Charles, here's something interesting. I don't know if you saw this, but it's an article here in The Conversation saying, can Trump strip Harvard of its charitable status? And the thing starts off saying no. It says the IRS rarely revokes an organization's charitable tax-exempt status for failure to operate for a charitable purpose. That's true, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't. And then they also go on to say that it's illegal for a president to, get the IRS to audit somebody.
Well, who is that? Who is the fake news operation that put this article out?
The Conversation. I don't really know who that is.
Yeah, is con/versation?
I don't know.
A discussion with con artists. So yes, this is a thin case. Yes, because of Nixon trying to sick the IRS on political opponents, there's a specific rule or regulation or maybe even law which bars the president from directing the IRS to specifically target somebody. That is true. But it is also the scale of this fraud is, we're a pioneer here. I mean, the scale of what Harvard has done inaccurately, illegally, I don't think the Clinton Foundation comes close to this. I mean, this is something that has a $52 billion general purpose endowment. Similarly, the Clinton Foundation was only authorized to have an endowment, to raise an endowment to get the money together that was required to pay the National Archives, the required endowment. If you make a donation of a presidential library, you have to give the National Archives an endowment. That's the only endowment the Clinton Foundation was authorized to have. But of course, after 2011, when Hillary was fixing, as they say in the South, to run for president again, she wanted to have another slush fund. So they started with Dennis Chang, and they've created a general purpose endowment, which they shouldn't have. Harvard as well has this gigantic endowment. Why do you need 50? If you could charge gullible students $100,000 a year to learn how to paint their hair blue, put in nose rings, wear tattoos, and spout Trump derangement syndrome progressive, in quotes, garbage, why do you need a $53 billion or $52 billion endowment? You don't. So what is that money used for? Harvard, I don't know if they pay property taxes, but because they're tax exempt, a lot of these
Probably
educational institutions don't have to. So Yale pays a voluntary tax. I don't know if Harvard does, property tax to the localities. But, these people believe at Harvard that they're the brand standard, the imprimatur for the globalist system, that they make or break and shape globalist narratives. If you've got the dean of the Kennedy School at Harvard saying that the way forward is for nation states to disappear and for European and globalist systems to come together, well, then everybody said, well, Harvard said it, so maybe we should do it. That is not what was originally contemplated, nor is it what's just in an educational charity. Educational charities need tax exemption because they can't survive in the competitive world on their own. It's clear that Harvard can. So I applaud what President Trump is doing. I go a step further. I would appoint a conservator for Harvard and these other places. I'd say, look, we've been interacting with you now for months. It's clear that your governance structure is broken. You don't have the best interests of the entity, the public charity, Harvard. You're not preserving or protecting those best interests. So we're going to put you into conservatorship. We're going to study Harvard from the inside. And if we find, with the available information, if we find that prior to being put into conservatorship, trustees violated their duties of care, loyalty, and obedience to the law, or other parties did the same thing, we're going to go after you with the full force of the United States government. And we'll see where this ends up. We will see. That would scare, some of the trustees at Harvard are powerful people who believe that they could just wait Trump out. Trump will be gone in 2029 January, so we'll wait this motherfucker out, and we'll stir up our alumni base, who are very influential people. Their objection to this will be useful in the political fight against Trump in the midterms and in 2028. They believe they can stall and wait this out. So good on Trump here.
Yeah, we'll see what he does. So there you go. That's Harvard. And now the other thing is he's rattling Putin, right? He's saying, "Oh, I don't like what Putin's doing." I think he's blowing it with Putin.
No, there's news on that. So what happened is, what just happened, actually, I don't know if it's moments ago or hours ago, because I just woke up about an hour ago, is that Trump was pressed by reporters, what do you mean by all this? When are you going to institute sanctions and new sanctions? And he said, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to screw this up. I'm close to a peace deal, which is what I suspected he might be doing. So interestingly, there are a number of things coming together at the same time. You have the Ukraine-Russia conflict, which scares globalists a lot. You have the European Union U.S. conflict, where this European association is in great peril. You have the China-U.S. conflict over trade, and now you have this Harvard thing. It's all coming together at the same time, and the losers are falling all over themselves to band together. The losers being China, Europe, and Zelensky, right? China has a population that is barely growing. It has a system that is the opposite of transparent. Nobody understands how much true debt, external debt, and other debt there is in China. Nobody knows how profitable their companies are. Nobody knows how corrupt the place is yet. Nobody knows how they're going to finance their military expansion aims. And the economy, without access, their private sector without access to the U.S. is finished, right? Europe has a similar problem. On the one hand, the whole concept of an unelected bureaucracy governing a place that has too much national bureaucracy, doesn't have innovation, whose population is actually shrinking rapidly, whose costs are very high, where the corruption is rife. China must believe that if they can't gain access to the U.S., they'll gain access to Europe. But big whoop. I mean, all the while I've been investing, I've been trying to invest in companies that grow. Companies that grow typically serve populations that are growing. If you've got a shrinking population with high costs, you've got a big problem. So here, China and Europe, the European Union, are banding together, and they're all three thinking that they can prolong this conflict between the U.S. and Russia,
Ukraine
or at
and
least,
Russia, yeah.
well, no, but supported by the U.S. China must look at this and say, you know what, we're a little bit fearful of Russia. Why don't we, let this thing go on and on and on? And if it hurts Russia, so be it. If it hurts Russia, that will strengthen us. So it's in China's interest to have us be at loggerheads with Russia over Ukraine. So this is a bunch of losers getting together, thinking they can continue to manipulate mainstream opinion via lamestream media, social media, and other means. And there are a lot of despicable grifters who over decades have been taking money from China, from Europe, from Zelensky, and they know that Trump is over the target now, and they're doing everything they can to F him up. And unfortunately, he has too many people still in his administration and holdovers who understand the jig is up here. So they're going to do everything they can to screw this up.
Yeah.
So I agree. You and I had a long offline conversation 12 hours ago or so where things did not look good. But I'm hopeful that the ball is bouncing in the right direction on Ukraine anyway. But it's ridiculous to believe, and nobody should believe, that I obviously don't speak for all Americans, but nobody should believe that the American people have any interest in shedding blood and treasure for a corrupt dictator in Zelensky any longer. There is no appetite for that. And interestingly as well, you and I had our eyes focused on what was going on in the UK and in Europe with the censorship stuff. Good on Rubio and Vance and Trump. They sent a delegation to England and to Europe, and they said, fuck a vous on this. You can't do this. And the first concrete step out of that is that Rubio is quoted as saying that any individuals from states involved in censorship will be denied entry into the United States of America. I mean, that's a big move and a good one. The next step would be sanctions on entities inside the UK and Europe that promote this, because censorship is weakness. Of all the different things in the American experiment that we should create, we should value, the idea of freedom of expression is something that many patriots died over. And it's central to the United States of America to allow that. And testament until recently, when our educational institutions got corrupted, existed to have, the wisdom of having freedom of expression. So that's a positive development.
That is, and it's also got to do with some of the, we're going to have to break here in a minute, Charles, and head over to the First Amendment Forum, but you've set up a good entree to speak about some of the stuff that's been going on in my ongoing counter lawfare campaign. It went to DEFCON 1 last week, and I had to launch on Boasberg. He got a motion filed under the authority of the Constitution to declare judicial forfeiture. I've done another one today, And it's interesting because these cases appear to be coordinated. There's another Article 3 good behavior violation that's been filed here. This is a pretty newly appointed judge, Amir Ali. He's an Egyptian Canadian. I think I like people who are calling for, just like the president has to be American born, I think the judges should be too, not to be racist against foreigners, but because we see how this is a branch of government that has been infiltrated by people who do not adhere to the law. This judge has basically, once again, refused to docket something that I filed. Now, I don't deny that the judge could deny it for a wide range of reasons, but he just said, you can't file it, adding insult to injury the same day. He allowed this thing to be docketed. This is a motion from a nonprofit, once again. The nonprofit is called the National Security Counselors. So it's a team of lawyers who think they have something to do with national security. And this is clearly viewpoint discrimination, which ironically was the topic of the video with Larry Klayman just last night, where in the case that Larry was talking about, which also involved Jeb Boasberg, they basically arrested this guy, I think his last name is Gurley, for having a protest where he wanted to protest the abortion industry targeting black people and, disproportionately compared to white people. And it was Judge Boasberg, ultimately, who was overturned by the appellate court. So we'll see how that goes, but we'll be back in just a minute. Thanks to everybody who's sponsoring the show. You're going to be able to join us on subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth, patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. Odyssey will soon be adding Tether. So I'm not sure what that means exactly, but David Sachs, the cryptocurrency czar, made some kind of announcement about stable coins, which I believe Tether is part of that. So people will soon be able to sign up again on Odyssey. You can also join us on crowdsourcethetruth.substack.com. And of course, people who are following me on X at JG_CSTT can subscribe. I need to pay for this dental surgery, so sorry my voice sounds weird, but please join us and subscribe. Thanks for tuning in, everybody, and thanks to everybody who does sponsor this show.